Hey, buddy, you forgot your change. Makes the world go round.
What's that? Gold. Some people say love.
Yeah, they're right, too. It is love. Love of gold.
Welcome to Money Unplugged. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for being here. Happy Independence Day. I realize some of you are listening to this after July 4th, but that's when the episode comes out, so I wanted to do something a little different this time. Don't worry. I promise next week it'll be back to business as usual. Got some great guests coming up in the month of July, including best-selling author Charles Duhigg, financial advisor Malcolm Etheridge. I actually just sat down with Malcolm the other day. It was a great conversation. But today I wanted to hit on the themes of financial independence and financial freedom by sharing 3 of my favorite quotes from guests of this podcast on those themes. Because, look, we all have financial goals, and most of the time, those goals are different from other people in our lives. And that's okay. It's like Morgan Housel said in the very first episode of this podcast when he said, I think the biggest thing about money is understanding that there's no right answer for everybody. So our goals are different, but I do think they all come under the umbrella of financial independence. So the first quote that I want to highlight is from Clark Howard, best-selling author and one of the foremost personal finance experts in America over the last 25 years. And this is something that came up at the very end of our conversation when I asked him to share a penny for his thoughts. And he talked about how much of what we do in our financial lives is about choices, little ones and big ones that make the difference. He talked about the power of savings, and in particular, if you can put money away from your paycheck into an investment account of some kind, a 401k, if your employer offers one, you can put money into your own Roth IRA. He said the earlier you do that in your professional life, the better off you're going to be. And the last part of this, in fact, it's actually the last thing Clark says on the entire episode. He says, if you can do that, quote, you've developed a pattern of living on less than what you make, and you create freedom in your life. And when he said that, it totally transported me back to my first full-time job out of college. I graduated in 1990. I was living in Boston. And after about a decade of economic growth, the state of Massachusetts was in a recession, and I could not get a job to save my life. I had a couple of part-time jobs. I was racking up credit card debt. And it wasn't until a full year later that I got my first full-time job. It was in Washington, D.C. I had to move to find a full-time job. I was working in the U.S. Capitol building. My salary was $17,000. Which doesn't sound like much, and it wasn't. In today's dollars, that's like $40,000. So not great, but I could afford to live in a place with other people. I could pay my bills. I was making much less than some of my friends were at the time. But because I had spent a year making basically half of that amount, 17 grand, that was like real money to me. And when I was filling out the paperwork, one of the things I had the option to do was I could check a box and a small percentage of my salary would go into the thrift savings program, which is basically the retirement plan for federal employees. And I wanted nothing to do with that. I was in my early 20s. I was finally getting a real salary, and I wanted every penny of that salary. Thankfully, my older sister explained to me, pulled me aside and basically was like, check the box, put that money aside. You're not going to miss it. It's a few bucks now. You're not going to miss it. You will adjust your life and you won't even think about it. And in the future, it will have grown into actual money you can put towards your retirement. Now, I would love to tell you that in that moment, a light bulb went on over my head and I could fully comprehend what she was saying. But no, that is not the case at all. I was not happy about it. And grudgingly, I tell you, grudgingly, I checked that little box to put some money aside. And the first couple of paychecks, I looked at the amount that went into my bank account and I thought, it's nice, but it's not as much as it could be. But as was and is often the case with my sister, she was right, and I forgot about it. And I almost never think about it, except when I get an email from the Thrift Savings Program with my quarterly statement. And I see in real dollars what she was talking about. And what Clark Howard said when he was sitting across the table from me a couple of months ago, that one decision that I made 34 years ago helped point me in the direction of financial freedom and independence. The second quote is from my conversation with Linda Rottenberg, also a best-selling author and the co-founder of Endeavor. And this is among the more practical pieces of advice anyone has shared on the show when it comes to financial independence. She and her husband have daughters who are in college, and Linda and I were talking about teaching kids about money. And she has this idea, she said she feels strongly about when it comes to relationships and money, and it's what she called yours, mine, and ours bank accounts. And it's the idea that when you marry someone or you're in a committed relationship with someone, you've got bills that you're paying together. Maybe you got a mortgage together, car payments, groceries, the Netflix account, whatever. But while you have that joint account to pay those bills, Linda talked about the importance of having her own account, just like her husband has his own account, because, as she put it, I'm not going to have every purchase looked over if this is my money. No matter who you're involved with or what relationship you're in, it's important to have financial independence. And this came up more recently with Joe Mager when he talked about Robert Brokamp teaching a financial marriage counseling session. And one part of that was coming up with an amount of money that you and your spouse can spend without checking first with the other. Like, is this okay? It's a great idea. It's very practical. And I could not agree more with what Linda Rottenberg said. It is a nice reminder, among other things, that financial independence comes in different forms. The third quote that I want to highlight is from David Brancaccio from Marketplace Radio. And this came up in our conversation when I asked him what he wished he knew earlier in life about money. And look, most, if not all of us, have dealt with credit card debt at some point in our lives. When I was in my 20s, I racked up so much credit card debt, it took me 2 to 3 years to fully pay it off. And when it was paid off, I didn't celebrate. I just felt relief, like, oh, thank God that's over. But I never thought about it in terms of freedom. I never thought about it in a bigger sense like that. And when I asked David what he wished he knew earlier in life about money, he said, and I'm quoting here, if you save and if you also pay down debt and you're careful with credit cards, it buys you freedom. It buys you freedom. I love that so much. And maybe it's just me, or maybe it's just something that's harder to wrap your head around when you're younger. But for me, it's really only been in the last 10 years or so that I have started to have that as my default thinking when it comes to money. The idea that with certain investments or certain purchases, you're buying freedom. Or in my case, more specifically, I think of it in terms of buying peace of mind. The investing corollary to this is when I was hosting podcasts for The Motley Fool, every now and then I would bring up what I called the sleep factor when it comes to investing. Basically, if you're losing sleep over your investments, you're doing it wrong. And David followed up his point about buying freedom with a great story about the time that he interviewed Captain Kirk. Yeah, William Shatner was in the studio. And by all means, you can go back through the feed and hear him tell the full story. But the financial piece of it was that William Shatner's really smart about money. And in particular, Shatner talked with him about knowing early in his acting career that if he wanted to take advantage of certain opportunities, he couldn't be saddled with debt. So that's something Shatner has always been very careful about. So there you go. David Brancaccio, Linda Rottenberg, Clark Howard. Those are three of my favorite quotes on this podcast about financial independence. Like I said, next week I'll be back with a new guest, but I wanted to celebrate Independence Day with something a little different. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying a long weekend with something fun, relaxing, and/or delicious. Be safe out there. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.